Everyone thought he was just an armed student, but in reality, he was the most powerful hero who had defeated the Demon Lord. The war between humans and demons ended when the great hero Blade fought the Demon King. The Demon King had declared that if the hero lost, all of humanity would be destroyed. He dropped a massive meteoroid from the sky, but the hero destroyed it with a small stone charged with spiritual energy. Then they both decided to fight at full power and attacked each other. Their clash devastated the entire battlefield. Both were equally powerful, but neither could win until the last moment. Finally, they plunged their swords into each other's hearts and fell. They were both close to death, but Blade was happy that he had ended the battle. Luckily, the hero's body was like an old Nokia phone, unbreakable even if smashed. That's why he survived, even though the sword pierced his heart. It took him some time to recover, but a few months later, he returns to his home country, this time as a normal boy who joins a school for talented hero candidates. Now, his only goal is to make 100 friends, so he happily greets everyone on the way. He asks them if they'll be his friends. The students think he's a little weird, but in a good way. That's why they agree. Blade is overjoyed. But then Ernest Fleming, Hero Academy's top student, arrives. Arns arrives and begins to lecture him for causing a commotion in the corridor. When Blade introduces himself as a transfer student, Ernest becomes suspicious, but Blade doesn't care. He casually asks him to escort him to the principal's office. When he arrives, it's not the principal sitting there, but the king of their country himself. Ernest Turan falls to his knees to greet the king, but Blade, without hesitation, walks straight to the king as if they were best friends. The king tells Arns not to be so formal, and tells him that from today on, he will be the new principal of Hero Academy. Hearing this, Arns is overjoyed and gives a long speech about how grateful he is for the king's visit. But the king tells him they can leave now because he needs to talk to Blade, the boy in black and white. Blade asks the king what he wants. The king explains that he wants Blade to regain his hero powers. Blade refuses, saying he's tired of the hero life, but King insists. He says the Hero Academy students will train him. He knows that Blade and Dewan King will face off in their final battle. Both of them have lost their powers, but he hopes that with proper training, Blade can reawaken his great heroic powers. The king doesn't give Blade any choice. Later, Blade attends practical combat class. He goes to Ernest, who tells him that this is an advanced class, and he must first complete basic training. Blade shows him that he has already completed the basic test, which Ernest finds in disbelief. Blade then approaches the clown-like students and tells them to be his friends, while Ernest continues shouting from behind, "Come back here!" He turns around and places his hand on Ernest's face, causing him to blush as red as his own red hair. He immediately attacks him with his sword, but Blade easily dodges his powerful slash. Ernest is amazed by his reflexes. Just then, a blue-haired girl arrives and calls them both to the teacher. She reveals her name to be Sophie, and Ernest is even more surprised as he has never seen this girl talk. Ernest becomes even more suspicious of the blade and asks the teacher to let him test it. First, Blade is taken to a practice dume and asked to cut it if he's strong enough. Blade says it's a small thing for him. He uses his special short technique, releasing his spiritual energy and attacking the dummy with his special move, Dragon Eater. The attack blows the dummy and the wall behind it away. Blade is overjoyed with his performance. As soon as his sword breaks, Arns approaches him and asks, "Hey, brother, are you?" He is shocked to see that the shock waves from Blade's attack tear his clothes and knock down nearby students. Later, when Arns is having lunch in the cafeteria, Blade approaches him and calls out for his friends, but he refuses. Arns explains that everyone is afraid of him, but he doesn't explain why. Blade immediately forgets what she said as he tucks into his food. Arns apologizes for his earlier rude behavior and admits that Blade is talent. Blade says he had already forgotten everything because they are now friends. Hearing this, Arns' face turns even redder and he begins to blush. Arns also has a room in his room. They continue to think about being friends, but then his sword suddenly begins to act paranormally. He remembers a time in his childhood when his family owned a demon sword that one day came to him and promised him power. He took that power, but the sword's curse changed him. Since then, the sword constantly urges him to burn everything in flames and destroy it, but Arnes suppresses it with sheer willpower. The next morning, he has a practice battle with a boy who uses a large spear. Arnes easily defeats him, but he becomes so involved in the fight that he nearly kills him. After the battle, he challenges someone else. Sophie steps forward and says that Arnes should control himself. Arnes attacks him, but Sophie remains firm. Arnes then uses a fireball, but Sophie dodges him and he admits defeat. Arnes then challenges Blade, who becomes a little worried because he thinks Arnes is already exhausted. Arnes claims he's fine, but as soon as he picks up his sword, the effects of the curse reappear. Blade he catches Ernest just as he begins to faint and takes him to a doctor. The doctor explains that he cannot cure the curse. After a while, Ernest regains consciousness, and when the doctor refuses to let him leave the room, he claims he's perfectly fine. Blade vanishes to keep an eye on Ernest. Therefore, the doctor lets him go. Even though Ernest pretends he doesn't need anyone's help, Blade can't leave him alone. So, he sneaks into a secret facility at night and hacks the system to discover that Ernest possesses a demonic sword named Asmodeus. The next day, he asks him to speak alone and tells him that he has discovered the sword's secret. He explains that the demonic sword has a will of its own, which is why Ernest can't fully control its power. Blade asks for the story, and Arns explained that the first time she touched the sword, she was filled with a desire to destroy everything, and she has been fighting those Arns ever since. Arns knows that if she defeats and and controls the demon residing within the sword, everything will be alright, but she isn't sure she can win. Blade says she's stressed. There's no need to take it, because even if he frees the demon, he'll handle it. Ernest trusts him, and at night, he summons the demon Asmodeus, sealed in the sword, to form a contract with him. The sword is engulfed in flames, and Ernest finds himself facing the demon Asmodeus, who isn't willing to give up without a fight. Both release their flames, and Ernest summons his own. The demon breaks free and launches a powerful attack, but Ernest counters with all his might. She wins, and when the tornado of fire ends, she falls from the sky. But Blade, still naked, catches her and congratulates her on her victory. Ernest now seems completely confident, and the next day, he's the first one to approach the other students. Later, Blade is back in practical class, fighting two clowns. He dodges their attacks without looking at them. Ernest tells him not to be so disrespectful. Blade looks at her and says that she looks a little different today, but he doesn't understand that the change is due to her new hairstyle. Ernest feels a little sad, but quickly recovers and asks Bleach to help train Sophie because none of the other students are at her level. He explains that Sophie is always alone and never takes action unless told to. However, when she first met Blade, he was quite comfortable. Blade goes and talks to her and says he wants to train with her. Sophie replies that she only fights with her bare hands because she has never learned to use a weapon. Blade says he will teach her how to use a sword. Sophie asks if this is an order. Blade says no, he just wants to help his friend. Hearing this, Sophie smiles slightly. Blade teaches her how to channel her spiritual power into the sword. Sophie learns quickly, and by evening, she has mastered the basics. But then she suddenly throws the sword at Blade, and as Blade catches it, Sophie grabs him, knocks him to the ground, and grabs him, showing off her true skills. Blade later goes to the king, who is delighted to see that our lone hero is now with some friends. Blade explains that he has befriended Sophie. Roger reveals that Sophie is an artificial hero developed by an underground society to make her more powerful than all the previous heroes. He explains that many clones of the original Sophie were created, and the Sophie we have now is their latest prototype. Blade is furious upon hearing this, but Roger calms him down, saying he destroyed the underground society and freed Sophie, but he couldn't free her mind. Blade feels bad that his friend never lived a normal life, so he vows to teach her how to live like a normal person. But the problem is that Blade himself doesn't know what it means to be normal. To find answers, he approaches different people and learns that normal teenagers go on dates with their friends. He asks Arns what people do on dates. Arns blushes because she thinks Blade is asking her out, but as soon as Blade gets an answer, he goes straight to the girls' changing room and asks Sophie out, and it's not a command. Yet Sophie agrees without hesitation. The next day, Arns goes to Blade and Sophie's date with two other girls. She secretly watches. Arns becomes jealous when she sees them walking hand in hand, eating ice cream, running like Naruto, playing games, and doing all the other normal things. At night, they sit in front of a fountain, and Sophie asks Blade why he's doing so much for her. Blade says because they're friends. Sophie says he wants to tell her a secret now, too, because he's her friend. She explains that he's a test subject, artificially granted great hero powers. Blade is confused, and then Sophie releases her energy. The railings near him begin to shake and tighten, lifting him up. Sophie explains that great hero powers can do such strange things, but she still can't fully control them. They then fall down, creating a large crater. He tells Blade that he can manipulate gravity and increase his weight by 1,000 times. He gets up to talk to her, and Sophie shows him that she can also stop time. After doing this, he becomes very tired because she can only use her powers for 10 seconds. Her story after hearing this, Blade can't hide his identity and reveals to Sophie that he was once a great hero, but now he has no powers left. He tells Sophie that he himself is responsible for the experiments on him. Blade feels that his powers are like a curse that prevents him from living a normal life. Since the age of 3, he has fought monsters until his death, saving as many people as he could, but there were still many who hated him because he couldn't save everyone. Blade weeps and recounts his horrific past, and Sophie runs to him, telling him that he should be proud of himself. He embraces him and says that he has seen many people in cities who have survived because of heroes, but even this doesn't make Blade feel any better. But when Sophie says that she's glad she's an artificial hero and that she wants to be like Blade, Blade completely overcomes his trauma. Blade and Sophie then promise each other never to share each other's secrets. The next day, while Blade is having lunch with Ernest and Sophie, the rest of his friends join them. They are no longer in their school uniforms, as they have been promoted to an advanced class. It has been changed to a place where they can wear whatever they want. Arns explains that the king recently announced that he will be bringing a magical beast to the school, but Blade is unfazed by this. Suddenly, the school building begins to shake, and Blade realizes that the magical beasts have arrived. He immediately runs outside with his food in hand, and sees a dragon out of control. Everyone is scared of it, but Blade jumps straight up and knocks it down with just one punch. He reassures his friends that the dragon is just a baby and is angry because it is hungry. He gives the dragon his food and strokes its head. Then he realizes that everyone is staring at him. Blade realizes that it is not normal for people to defeat a dragon with a single hit, and everyone starts to distance themselves from it. Then the baby dragon starts glowing and transforms into a girl. The dragon boys jump straight at Blade. He hugs her tightly and calls her Papa. Blade, still unaware of the girl's true identity, tells her to be quiet and asks his friends where the dragon is gone. When Sophie and Ernest tell him that the dragon has, he is surprised to see that he has changed his form. The dragon boys hug him again and say that he tried to remember remains silent for 10 seconds. That's why they want to play with him now. Blade doesn't have any other boys, so he adopts him and names him Coup. The next day, Ernest feels jealous when Coup sits on Blade's lap and asks to be fed. Another boy wants to feed Coup, but Coup scares him away because he doesn't want to talk to weak people. Later, during practical classes, Coup comes to meet Blade, and he asks her to join him in training. Coup is very excited that she will train with her father, but then a group of Blade's friends surround him because they have all been put in the same group. When Coup sees that Blade is paying more attention to them, he becomes angry and runs away. He sees some students training and suggests he join them if he's interested, but Coup simply runs away, saying he's not worthy of them. Blade quickly finds him and takes him out to dinner. Later, Coup is sleeping soundly. Ernest comes to visit Blade. He explains that he found out it's implied that Coup considers Blade his father. He says that drogs threaten their children immediately after birth, and the children feel safe around him because they sense his power. In this case, Coup had witnessed Blade's formidable strength, which is why he thought he was his father. Blade believes that Coup has never seen his real parents, and that's why he can't leave him alone. Hearing this, Ernest is at a loss and tells him to take good care of the dragon boy. When Blade returns to his room, he finds Coup missing from his bed. He finds her on the rooftop, looking at the moon. Blade thinks she might be feeling lonely. He asks her if she wants to make friends. Coup says that drogs are so powerful they don't need friends. But then he clings to Blade, saying that he just needs his father. The next day, Blade leaves Kong with him because only he is strong enough to handle him. But Coup runs away, irritated by King's greasy beard. Blade searches for him throughout the school and finds him playing a room, making toys. Blade finds Ernest. Sophie and his other friends have versions of themselves. They pretend to care for them and perfectly copy their habits. But not only that, but they've also memorized the names of the students they met at school, half of which Blade doesn't know. Blade realizes that Coup wants to be friends with everyone, and he feels bad that he didn't understand this earlier. He leaves his room dejected, and Ernest looks at him as if he's in a terrible mood. Blade starts banging his head against the wall, but Ernest stops him. He asks him what's wrong with him. Blade explains that Coup needs friends, but he doesn't consider anyone as equal until he defeats them. He feels he can't help him, but Ernest tells him not to be so sad and to ask his friends for help. The next day, Blade and Ernest go to practice arena and urge all the students to fight and defeat Coup. The students think this is impossible, but then Blade and Ernest kneel before them and plead. Sophie and Blade's other friends arrive and make their requests as well, because he too is worried about Coup. The other students, having no choice, agree to fight the dragon girl. Later, all the students gather in the arena to fight Coup, now in his dragon form. The king also comes to watch. His assistant asks him if the dragon boys will accept humans if they lose to the students. The king says that everything will be fine, because humans are so weak compared to dragons that fighting a dragon in a group is not cheating. Ernest then draws his sword and commands the students to get ready for battle. As soon as Can attacks, most of the students immediately run away, but Ernest takes charge and attacks the dragon, shouting to the other students to stay in formation. At his command, the students surround Coup from both sides and fire exclusive arrows at him. However, their attacks are too weak for the dragon. Coup simply throws them all away with his tail. While Coup is treating a student in one corner of the arena, healers are trying to heal injured students in another corner. Blade is watching all this from the balcony. King approaches him and says that the students will lose this battle. Then Coup stops firing for a while, and while he's distracted, Sophie and Ernest launch a combo attack. It does cause some damage, but not enough to take down the dragon. But this wasn't the students' original plan. As Cole recovers from their attack, he suddenly feels the ground shift beneath him, and he falls into a pit. King says it feels like cheating, but Blade insists it's not, because the trap wasn't set in advance. Leonard, the student wielding the Phala, had dug the pit during the fight. Bilk knows the real battle has just begun. All the students charge at Coup simultaneously, but he keeps them all at bay with his fire breath. Ernest uses his demon EXT, but the demon Asmodeus within is now exhausted from being used repeatedly. Arna's Guntod doesn't worry about that and launches a powerful attack at Coup. Immediately, Lon attacks with his drill land, but his attack fails to penetrate the dragon's thick skin. To escape the situation, he tries to fly away, but Ernest attacks him from above, knocking him back to the ground. Then, Sophie uses her gravity manipulation to make her arm 1,000 times heavier and delivers a powerful punch to the dragon's stomach. The village thinks now is their chance and tells Arns to end the fight. Although Asmodeus pleads with him to stop, Arns doesn't listen. He drains all of Asmodeus' power and creates a massive fireball. The other students transfer their spiritual energy to it, making it even more powerful. Arns further enlarges the fireball and launches at Coup. Cole realizes he's finished. The fireball hits him and explodes with a loud bang. Moments later, Coup returns to his human form. She begins to cry, saying she's lost and fears that her father, Blade, will abandon her because she's weak. Blade comforts her and promises he'll never abandon her. He then says that Coup isn't weak. It's just that humans become stronger when they combine their powers. Blade says that now that she's defeated, she shouldn't have any trouble accepting everyone as her friend. A little nervous, Ko asks everyone if they'll be her friends, and everyone happily agrees. A few days later, King arrives at the arena and begins working on a new training method for his students. He calls it virtual reality, and everyone awaits the completion of the facilities. Meanwhile, Blade's friends are joking around and feeding Ko in the cafeteria. Blade notices that Ernest has gained nearly 40 kilograms in in one night and says she looks different. All her friends call her beautiful and say that she's such a terrible person to judge a girl for her body. But Blade remains firm and simply says that Ernest has gotten fat. Ernest cries and shouts that she's crazy and runs away. Sophie and the other girls tell Blade that she's not embarrassed at all and that this could be the end of his friendship with Ernest. Blade doesn't understand what they mean. 3 days pass and Ernest remains locked in his room. Blade panics, fearing he might lose his friendship. He refuses, so he immediately runs to apologize. But the girls know that he still hasn't realized what he did wrong and that it will only anger Ernest even more, so they decide to go with him. They all reach Ernest's room, and when she doesn't open the door, they break it down. The room is dark, and Ernest is sitting in a corner, making strange, sobbing sounds. Everyone is worried by her condition. Just then, Coup smells something tasty and immediately jumps towards Ernest. Blade turns on the light and sees that Ernest has become even fatter and is eating sweets as if there is no hope for tomorrow. Ernest, crying, explains that ever since her fight with Coup, she's always hungry and can't stop eating desserts. Blade doesn't seem bothered by this and simply asks if she's no longer his friend. Ernest replies that it's not like that. She was hiding in the room because she didn't want anyone, especially Blade, to see her like this. Hearing this, Blade is overjoyed and starts to leave, but the girls stop him and tell him he should apologize to Ernest. Ernest feels better. Blade doesn't know what to do. Leonard shows him how to apologize, but he immediately gets punched and blows up. Blade then tells Ernest that he doesn't need to be ashamed of his dessert addiction and reminds him that his friends are always there for him. Ernest is delighted to hear this. The next morning, Blade starts Ernest's weight loss training. Ernest finds it difficult as he weighs 50 pounds. However, he exercises with motivation, but he doesn't make much progress. Even after eating very little for lunch and undergoing an hour-long sauna treatment, he still doesn't feel well. When he leaves sauna, his friends tell him to check the Oing machine. As soon as he stands on it, the machine breaks. Then he realizes that the normal way isn't the solution to this problem. The next day, she goes to the arena and asks Blade for help, saying she's about to do something extreme. With that, she draws her demonic sword and commands Asmodeus to consume her body and give her his power. Her body becomes exhausted from the fire, and Blade simply stares at the massive pillar of flame. Ernest is consumed by it. Sophie and the others rush to the arena, and after a moment, Ernest appears before everyone as a fire demon. Everyone hears the voice of the demon Asmodeus, who praises Ernest's achievement. He asks Ernest who he wants to burn with such superpowers. Ernest replies that he wants to burn his own skin, as he has done all this solely for his weight loss. Asmodeus is shocked, but then he realizes that Ernest made the right decision, as staying in this ferocious form consumes 1 million calories every hour. Ernest laughs and says that he won't need to exercise for months, but then he begins to feel weak because he has already used up so much energy. He collapses and his stomach rumbles. Ernest says he's hungry and goes into the beast moon, ready to eat anything, even his friends. Ernest attacks, but Blade uses a slightly milder version of his special move and extinguishes his fire with the wind pressure of his attack. He approaches Ernest, who has now returned to his normal form. When he opens his eyes, Blade praises him for his excellent work, but Ernest hasn't learned his lesson yet, and that very night, he begins eating like a demon again. His friends realize there's nothing they can do about it. A few days later, Blade goes to the school doctor for a routine checkup, who tells him that his condition is improving, but if he uses more than 30% of his true power, he will die instantly. On his way back to the classroom, his friend Claire introduces him to a girl named Maria, a shy and Paku girl. Blade remembers meeting Maria during the students' battle against Coup. He remembers how Maria repeatedly fell and shot fireballs in the wrong direction. The poor boys are deeply hurt by their complete shattering of confidence. Maria asks Blade for a favor. If he ever loses control of his powers, Blade should kill her. Blade's friends overhear this, and Maria reveals that she is not a pure human, but a human-demon hybrid. Blade has already realized this, and Maria feels comfortable telling him everything. Just then, her teacup breaks, and the tea immediately turns to steam. He apologizes to everyone, and says that this happens whenever he loses control. Maria says that ever since her fight with Coup, she's been failing to control her powers. Blade explains that this is because human spiritual power is different from demon's magic, and that when Maria was filled with spiritual power, her magic circuits were damaged. Maria confirms this, and insists that if her true powers ever come out, she must be stopped immediately. He says that she has no one in this world. Her parents are dead, and she doesn't even have a home. He asks Blade for help, and Blade immediately agrees. All his friends agree as well. Later, Blade takes everyone to the arena and tells his friends to tamper with the controls and exhaust the arena with the most powerful magic barrier. Ernest is deeply displeased that Blade has entered school property without permission, but Blade isn't bothered. He turns directly to Maria and tells her to unleash her full hidden power. Maria refuses, but Blade assures her that everything will be fine. Still, Maria says she can't release her powers. Ernest reminds her how Blade helped her when she was battling her inner demon. Hearing this, Maria finally relents. He disables her magic artifacts one by one. Each bracelet has her power, and her necklace reduces her power by a factor of 10. Ernest immediately realizes that Maria is now 107 times more powerful than her original form and attempts to stop her. But just as he approaches Maria, a strong gust of wind blows him back. Maria screams loudly again, saying that the demon within her is coming out. Blade tells her to let everything out and trust her friends. friends. Maria agrees and transforms into her demon form. But when Blade sees a strange mark on her head, he realizes that Maria is no ordinary demon, but the second reincarnation of the demon lord himself. Maria immediately confirms this and laughs, saying that everyone should be put to death because the demon king has returned. Arns immediately switches to his fire demon mode and attacks Maria, but Maria knocks him out with a single slap. Lana immediately runs to Maria's side, but he defeats him with just a snap of his finger. Sophie and Coup decide it's their turn. Sophie jumps toward Maria, grabs her, and uses her most powerful gravity magic. Coup transforms into dragon form. Sophie pins Maria to the ground, preventing her from moving, but after a few seconds, she falls unconscious. Meanwhile, Coup charges his fire breath and attacks with full power. Maria intercepts his attack and returns it back. Coup, like everyone else, is defeated. Blade is now furious. He attacks Maria. When he declares that after dealing with Blade, she will destroy the entire kingdom, Blade attacks him with his sword. Maria initially thinks it's a joke, but then realizes that Blade doesn't intend to kill her. She tells him to fight seriously, or he will actually kill her. Then, using her wind magic, she throws Blade into the barrier. Blade finally draws his sword and attacks Maria again, but Maria easily counters each of his attacks. Blade retreats a few steps. Then Maria flies into the sky and uses fire magic to counterattack. Blade barely blocks it with his sword, but the sword cannot withstand much damage and breaks. Maria is impressed that he is still alive. Meanwhile, Ernest regains consciousness and goes to Blade, asking him to use his demon X word. Blade picks up the sword and the demon Asmodeus tells him that it is against his rules, but due to his master's orders, he will serve Blade. Maria says that Blade has a powerful sword in his hand, and the fight will be even more fun. But Blade says that he will end this fight once and for all. He gathers his spiritual power and infuses it into the sword. Asmodeus panics because he cannot handle so much power, but Blade scolds him and tells him to stop crying. Blade combines his power with the demon's flame and attacks Maria with a powerful fire slash. Maria blocks it by forming a shield, saying that this is not enough to defeat a demon lord. But suddenly his shield begins to crack. She is overwhelmed by Blade's power. They ask who he is. Blade replies that he is just an armed student. His attack completely shatters Maria's shield, and the resulting shockwave reverberates throughout the arena. He also breaks the barrier. The fight ends, and Blade is happy that no one died, but he used all his strength in this fight. That's why he faints. The next morning, when he wakes up in a hospital, the doctor immediately rushes to him. She hugs Blade and cries, saying that he almost died. If they had been even a minute late, Blade would no longer be alive. She scolds Blade, reminding him that he promised not to risk his life again. Blade apologizes for disturbing her. Then he asks how everyone is. The doctor says everyone is safe, even Maria. The next day, when Blade goes to school, he sees that the Demon King version of Maria has already made many friends. He greets her and almost calls her a great hero in front of everyone, but she stops him from revealing his secret. Maria plans to take advantage of this and blackmail Blade, and Blade requests her not to do so. Maria replies, "Don't call her Maria, because she is a different person now." When Blade asks her for a name, she says she doesn't have one. They leave, and Blade notices her becoming friendly with the students, so he goes to King with his friends. King reveals that he already knew Maria's true identity, yet he still admitted her to the school. King also reveals that Maria's mother was a human who is now dead, and her father was a demon king, whose whereabouts are unknown. Blade experiences a disturbing flashback, recalling his past battle with the demon king. Later, everyone sees that Maria's demon lord form had become quite popular at school, earning her the nickname Mao. Blade's friends believe she is very dangerous, but Arn says they can't do anything because King has taken full responsibility for her. Mao himself says that all her powers have been sealed, making her nothing more than a normal girl. She has no choice but to attend school. She also becomes friendly with Ernest and the other girls, saying that living life as a normal girl is exciting for her. Ko is still afraid of her and clings to her father. Mao tells Blige that she's ready for a rematch with her anytime. Then they leave with their group of girls. Claire thinks Maria and Mao have different personalities. She wonders why Maria hasn't shown herself since Mao appeared, and he worries for his friend. One night, when Let comes home from putting Coup to bed, he hears his window open and sees Mao standing outside. He asks what she's doing. Mao says he wants to go on a date with her. Blade is in the mood, but Mao picks her up and shows her the moon. He says Maria always looked at the ground, which is why she never saw the moon's beauty. But Mao wants something different. Blade asks Mao her age. She tells him to come to her senses. She's only 5 years old, but she still doesn't want Blade to treat her like a child. He tries to show her his third-generation version of her, but when Blade doesn't react, Mao, a little sadly, says she is only at school because she's still connected to the great hero who defeated her. He explains that he, like any other magical beast, craves only power. That's why he respects and admires Blade, because he's even more powerful than him. He sits down next to him and says that perhaps Blade, now weaker than before, he still likes her. Mao takes her hand and says he's attracted to her. Blade becomes a little nervous. Mao repeats his words, saying he doesn't fully understand the meaning of his feelings, but he wants to spend more time with Blade. Blade replies that instead of complicated love affairs, it's better to go to the arena and have a good fight. Mao says Blade isn't in a position to fight her yet, and she can't remove her magical necklace that controls her powers. Mao explains that Maria's consciousness is still hidden within her, and she has to try her best to keep her power sealed. Blade wants to know more about Maria. Mao Mal explains that Maria was a quiet and timid girl who harbored many negative feelings. She faced a lot of discrimination and bullying as a child because she was a demon, even though her mother believed in her father. Maria couldn't do this, and when her mother died, she became completely confused. Maria wondered if her father was really a good man and ultimately blamed him for all her misfortunes. Mal says that she is an emotion who he was born to bring this poor girl out of her mental trauma. Mari may never regain control of her body. A few days later, Eliza, a friend from the research club, visits the Blade group and informs them that the necklace Mal wears is not a sealing artifact. She fully guarantees this and explains everything she has discovered. Eliza believes the necklace is actually a recording device containing a message from the person who gave it to her. Mal remembers that the necklace was given to Maria by her mother. Eliza explains that if she plays a recording, it might bring Maria back, but it's also possible that Mal's existence could end forever. She is excited by the idea and, despite the risks, gives permission to play the recording. As Elijah activates the device, Claire remarks that it's tragic that only one of Maria's two personalities can survive, but Mal is unfazed. The necklace's activation is complete, and Mal opens it. A hologram emerges, revealing the Demon King's final message to his wife. He apologizes to her. He demands that he leave her alone, but says it's necessary because he has to fight a very powerful enemy. He says, "I can't involve you in this fight while you're pregnant." He tells her that when their unborn child grows up, tell him that his father is dead. Finally, the Demon King says that even if he dies, he will always love his wife and child. The message ends, and Mal begins to cry. She says that she's barely able to control her body now, and that Maria will soon regain control. He tells his friends to call Maria's name so she can return, and that they shouldn't be sad about her death. Everyone loudly calls Maria's name, and Mal immediately falls to her knees. Her personality changes. Claire and Eliza comfort the crying Maria, and everyone is happy that she won. The bonus good news is that Mal wasn't destroyed either, as Maria wanted the two personalities to coexist. A short time later, Blade has a match with Maria in the arena. As soon as he takes off his glasses and undoes his hair, he transforms into Mal. A fierce fight ensues, and in the end, Blade overpowers Mal, while all their friends are cheering him on. Blade is walking through town with his friends when he sees a cart stuck under a bridge. They realize the cart is being pulled by a stationary tower, which Blade immediately recognizes. They are about to call Blade a great hero, but Blade stops them, explaining that his identity as a great hero is a secret. Neo explains that he has known Blade for a long time. Blade asks him what they plan to do with the cart. Coup offers to take care of it, and they all go to King. It turns out that the cart's real owner is King. King tells Dune that she will now teach at the academy because she is truly qualified to be an instructor. Dune is excited to teach Blade at the academy. Dune demonstrates his skills, attacking massive blocks of god iron that are considered impossible to break. He attacks with his lance, slicing a straight slit through the block. The students are impressed by his skill. Doan breaks the remaining blocks. Sophie notices that the heat generated by his blade melts the iron. Doan destroys all the blocks and says that the warm-up is now complete, so the class is ready to begin. Doan introduces herself to everyone and explains that she is known as Demon Lens. Arns recognizes her and asks if she is a commander of the Cavalry Corps. The class is surprised that such a high-ranking warrior would be their teacher, but Doan says that they are nothing compared to the great hero. Later, while everyone is bathing, Doan and his friends start asking him questions about Blade, asking what he was like before. Jessica pats him on the back, which pleases Doan, and he starts making strange noises. Hearing this, Lady becomes happy, which angers Arns. Jessica calms him down, saying that Blade has the mind of a 5-year-old child. Doan tells him that when he met Blade, Blade was only 5 years old and was as fearsome as a wild animal. He says that Blade even tried to eat him because he was so weak. Since then, Doan began training and became so strong that he was able to fight the great hero. He says that the great hero used to ride on his back, but he wasn't included in the final battle against the Demon King, perhaps because he wasn't strong enough at the time. A few days later, Blade and Arns are working in town when a large bird, a Simac, appears. Arns is surprised by what they're doing, but doesn't worry, as Simacs never attack humans. But suddenly, a Simac lands on them and destroys a cart. Arns considers fighting, but the glint in the Simac's eyes frightens him. Blade tells him to calm down. Arns raises his hands, and the birds fly away. Then it's revealed that there are 2 Simacs. They wonder why the cart was attacked. Perhaps it's King's fault. Arns runs to King and explains the situation. King explains that there was a blind Simac in Dune's cart, which is why both Simacs are angry. Arns becomes upset because King's actions have driven both Simacs insane. King explains that Sim had built a nest in the wrong place. The egg needs to be high enough to be exposed to sunlight. Only then will it hatch. If the egg had been left there, it would never have grown. King explains that the egg will hatch tomorrow, and he will be happy to see them. He orders everyone to protect it. The next day, Blade tells the students that they must guard the egg until the capital, as P.S. Wyme is furious and can harm it if they find it. Blade explains their plan is to hide the egg and take an elevator to the top of the tower, where it will hatch under perfect conditions. At the capital, Simac is destroying vehicles. However, the students have already evacuated the townspeople and are now fighting Simac. They have tied it up with god iron wire. However, the bird is so powerful that it lifts the entire building and flies away. Blade is nevertheless pleased that they have enough time for the egg to hatch. Claire is treating the injured, but just then, another Simac arrives. They fire fire blasts at it, but to no avail. Maria then takes control of Mal, who attacks with lightning, but even that fails to bring down the bird. Ernest uses all his energy to use Asmodeus' flames, significantly damaging the Simer. Running out of energy, it crashes into a building where it finds a pudding, which it eats and regains its strength. At sunset, he takes the elevator upstairs, but the elevator breaks down. Just then, a Simac appears flying straight toward them. Blade begins to climb the tower, but struggles because he can only use 15% of his strength. Neon helps him up, carrying him on his back. He reminds Blade that he's no longer alone. Blade smiles and says that he has many friends now, and he counts Dion as one of them. They reach undead, but Blade can't lift him. Then Dion offers an idea. He tells Blade to hold on tight. He then pushes him straight up. The king welcomes them, but then a Simac appears heading toward them. The king says it's time for him to act. He tells the bird that his name is Gilgamesh, the Soul Maker, and that he has come to pay a debt because a Simac once saved his life. But Simac is furious. He manages to blow King away in a jiffy, and the poor king gets hit by an egg, causing him to slide sideways inside. Blade tries to save him. Just then, Sophie suddenly appears and uses her powers to freeze time for 5 seconds, forcing Blade to use his drag skill. They get a chance to do so. They summon winged dragons, which defeat the Simac. After the attack, both Sophie and Blade collapse exhausted. The egg then hatches, and 2 Simac hatchlings emerge. They see Blade and mistake him for their mother. Blade is perplexed, wondering what he will do with them now. Several days later, Blade and Arns are practicing flying on the Simac. Arns is alarmed by their movements. He is living peacefully with everyone on the larger Simac. Blade is happy to have made more friends. One day, a dark atmosphere rises when Blade walks through the academy halls with a blood-soaked sword. The students try to stop him, but Blade cuts them all in an instant. He reaches Sophie. Sophie says that he always wondered what would happen if he used his full power. He uses his time-fresh ability to unleash a series of attacks. But when time returns to normal, Blade is unaffected. Blade grabs her by the throat and tells her that he has made his body as hard as diamond. He then plunges a sword into her chest, and Sophie falls. Blade then looks up and shouts that he wants out of this illusion. The king appears on a screen. He gives Blade a vision and tells him it's not an illusion, but virtual reality. This thing was created using modern magic. King explains that in this world, he can fight with his full power without harming anyone in reality. That's why it's perfect for training. Blade says that this world is very realistic, and people can get confused whether they're in the real world or the virtual world and accidentally hurt someone. King adjusts the settings and turns the entire world into a chocolate candy line. He tells Blade that it's a death match, and the winner can use the virtual reality as they wish. Underscore attacks with his lens, but Arn Asterin defeats him. It seems that in the virtual world, she's completely following her instincts. Blade is walking when he sees Clay fighting Jessica and Cassim fighting Claire. Jessica pushes him back, telling the boys to give up because they've never lost anyone, but the girls refuse to give up. Jessica defeats Cassim, and Claire hits Clay with her baton. Just then, Ernest approaches them. He attacks Blade like a psycho, but Blade frees everyone with his fierce attack. Blade regains consciousness, and King announces that Blade has won the tournament. Claire and Jessica say they didn't even see his attack. Ernest starts crying at his madness. King laughs and says it was fun, but Ernest isn't happy. Blade begins using the virtual reality mission. King sees that Blade has added incredibly powerful monsters to the world. He thinks it will be difficult even for the great hero, but Blade logs King into it. King panics when he's exposed to all sorts of monsters, and Blade tells his assistant to keep reviving him even if he dies. Blade enjoys the lunch, but Clay and Cassim are saddened. Arns asks what happened. Blade explains that he was defeated by the girls. He says that perhaps he had weakened in his skills and hadn't taken the training seriously. After lunch, Blade sees a flyer for a new hot spring. He goes there and finds Danae digging outside. He welcomes everyone, and they have a relaxing chat. Blade notices that Arns is missing. Jessica, she says maybe she doesn't like hot springs, but Arns emerges from behind a rock and says he doesn't like mixed talk. Clay and Cassim are still upset. The girls tell them they just won by chance, but Arns understands she's rubbing salt in their wounds. Claire apologizes for winning, but this hurts his ego, and he runs away crying. At night, Blade goes to see them. They say Blade can't understand them because he's never lost. They reveal that they both love the girls, which is why they felt so bad about losing. Just then, Coup enters the room and says he's a very strong guy because girls like strong men. He says Blade will train them. Meanwhile, the girls enjoy girls' night. Jessica asks what they should do with Cassim and Clay. Claire says maybe they should give them an advantage, but the others say that would only make things worse. Coup suddenly appears and says that guys like strong girls, and that girl should be strong too. But it's clear that these girls aren't that interested in them. Cassim and Clay begin training for Bleed. He makes them do all sorts of crazy things until the next virtual reality class comes a few days later. The boys are thinking that if they win, they will confess their feelings to the girls. A fight ensues and the girls attack them. But this time, Cassim and Clay have learned to use spiritual energy. They push the girls back. Blair explains that she taught them how to recognize it, but it seems the girls have also learned to use spiritual energy. In the arena, Claire knocks Cassim out with her hammer. Jessica freezes Clay and destroys him with lightning. After the fight, the boys thank them for not taking this fight lightly. They promise to become even stronger. Cassim asks about Jessica's eyes and lightning attacks. Jessica explains that she learned this power because of Sophie and Maria. Clay says that then it's wrong because the other girls also don't want them to win. But Ernest steps forward and says, why do you need to be stronger than the person you love? That's a stupid idea. I could never be stronger than Blade. A few days later, the girls find a robot and think, what is he doing there? Suddenly, the robot activates and shows Blade an image. We see Blade meditating when he jumps on Cuz, but his aura pushes him back. He asks what he's doing, and Blade explains that he's storing his power, so he can use more than 15% at a time. Just then, the girls arrive with a robot and explain that the robot was looking for him. Blade immediately draws his sword and destroys the robot with a single blow using the Dragonar skill. His sword breaks, and Blade explains that the meditation worked because he didn't tire even after using the skill. Arns asks why he destroyed the robot. Blade says they must destroy it because it S.A. Guardian. While talking, the robot scans Ernest, and Blade performs in the system. The robot returns the next day, but this time, taking the form of a girl. She explains that she took this form to activate Blade's protective instincts. Blade asks who she is, but as she moves to attack, Blade strikes first and throws her into a wall. Arnes kills Blade for attacking a girl, but Blade says not to worry. The boys recover in a short while. Blade wants to break him again, but Ernest stops him, saying he doesn't look dangerous. Blade still doesn't believe it, because Guardians can be very dangerous. The robot girl reveals that she was ordered to kill Blade, and is currently observing him to collect data. Claire asks her if she would like to join their class, and calls her Yona, because she has 10 and written on her chest. The girl reveals that it's her ID number, but Claire still calls her Yona. Yona is reluctant to join the class, but Claire says they will work together to defeat Blade. Yona agrees to this. They discuss how to defeat Blade. Claire asks why Yona is after her. We know that Blade entered an area she was guarding, the Royal Library, where he learned about Asmodeus, the object we saw at the beginning of the video, right? It tells him that Blade destroyed it multiple times. Blade explains that they always attacked him first, so he had no choice. Girls Blade becomes angry and he leaves. Sophie follows him, and Blade explains that he entered the library because, as a great hero, his job was to search for information. He also explains that Guardians keep their souls in a separate place, so even if their bodies are destroyed, they don't die. Eliza devises a plan. If Yona's soul is placed into a normal human body, Blade will hesitate to attack, as Yona will no longer be immortal. In the arena, Blade and Yona prepare to fight. Yona reveals that she is not connected to Mother Computer and will truly die if destroyed. They launch a powerful attack on Blade, blowing him away. Blade goes to use Dragon Eater, but stops, knowing it could kill Yona. Therefore, he uses the skill with his bare hands, but it has no effect. Yona counters him, destroying the entire area with one attack. Blade admits defeat, and everyone celebrates Yona's victory. Later, Yona explains that she has been trying to reconnect to the Mother Computer, but the system is rejecting her because she now appears to be a defective unit. She's a little worried. She feels lost because she has no master. She wants Blade to become her master, or else the countdown will continue. Yona reveals that she will destroy the cell, which sends everyone into a panic, as her explosion is coming in a few days. Blade finally says that he will become her master. Yona is overjoyed and says that she will now follow Blade's commands. But Sophie becomes sad because Yona is copying her. The two begin to fight for Blade's attention. They hold a contest to see who can serve Blade best. That evening, they both watch over Blade as he sleeps. Yona explains that he was always alone, and Byleth was the only person who would visit him. Sophie was also alone when he was in the lab. She says that it was only because of Blade that she was able to experience a new life. They both realize that there is not that much difference between them, and gradually they begin to grow closer. Blade is overjoyed to see this. The next day, Blade asks Yona to show him his counter. It's revealed that they're going to have cell distractions in a few hours. He explains that serving Bleed has slowed his counter down a bit, and Elijah speculates that might be why. Because Bleed is human, Jonas says he wants to spend his last moments with him, so everyone throws a party for him. They tell him to enjoy this moment to the fullest, as everyone is trying to fulfill his wishes. Calling him their friend, they all have fun together. After the party, Ernest sets out to find Bleed, but he is nowhere to be found. As Jonas' time is almost up, he moves away from everyone and creates a barrier around everyone to protect him from harm. He thanks everyone and says they filled his last moments with happiness. He now understands humans. Jonah tells Ernest that he is afraid because he doesn't want to end his life. He tells everyone to never forget him and says goodbye. But everyone is shocked because Jonah doesn't self-destruct. Everyone wonders what is going on. Just then, Bleed emerges from the ground. Ernest asks him why he didn't come to the party. Blade reveals that he went to Mother Computer and begged her to save Jonah's life, and that this restored Jonah's connection to Mother Computer. And now Jonah is facing self-destruction. She won't. Everyone rejoices. Later, a battle royale takes place at the academy, where students use their powers to fight each other. Blade easily defeats everyone, leaving only Leonard standing. Everyone shares the story, telling him to defeat Blade. Leonard wants to win for Ernest's sake, but Ernest thinks he has no chance because he's too weak. Leonard attacks Blade, but Blade quickly defeats him. Everyone else leaves, treating him like garbage. That evening, Leonard reflects on how powerful Blade is and feels he's no match for him, but he also knows Ernest will never look at him unless he defeats Blade. The next day, Leonard meets Maria. Maria knows he wants to win against Blade, so she says she'll support him and trust him. Leonard thanks him and says he'll win at any cost so Ernest will recognize him. Just then, Elijah approaches them. He says he knows defeat defeating Blade isn't just difficult, it's impossible. So he offers to help them, saying he'll come up with a plan. Lon calls Blade's friends and asks if they have any idea how they can defeat Blade? Blade and Mal then summon Asmodeus. A powerful wave forms around them, and Asmodeus transforms into a giant sword. Blade wields the holy demon sword and attacks Bahamut, slicing him in half. Mal remembers the same technique Blade used to defeat him. Blade is exhausted and thanks Mal before falling unconscious. Back at the academy, the doctor explains that Blade can now use his after persona powers as his body is slowly healing. Blade goes to the cafe area, where the students have prepared a surprise for him and wish him a happy birthday. Arns explains that today is the day he was adopted, which is why they consider it his birthday. The cook explains that Blade is now 18 years old. Arns shows him his gift, special tonkatsu suri that he made from all the materials he collected. Blade is amazed by everyone's efforts and breaks down in tears upon testing it, thanking him for being his friend. Clay practices Blade's technique. He creates a Vin fork that hits the target, and he's elated that he's mastered it. Sophie arrives, and Clay begins to explain it to her. Sophie also learns the technique and creates a powerful tornado around herself. The boys, amazed, watch what's happening. Blade explains that this is exactly what the technique looks like. Sophie launches Vin at the target, completely shattering it. Suddenly, they try to attack Blade, but the real Sophie arrives and stops Edek. Everyone is astonished, wondering how there could be a second Sophie. They immediately flee back to Baropia, to an abandoned building, where they discover her name is Una. There, they meet the other clones, who are part of the Artificial Hero Program. They declare their mission a success and share the data, so everyone can learn Blade's technique. They try the technique and destroy the building they're in, but he reveals that his true goal isn't to learn this technique, but to destroy Blade. As Eliza tries out her invention, she performs a fire launch, which impresses everyone. Blade says that there's nothing special. Elijah gets angry at this and says that they're not as powerful as him. Just then, one of the clones arrives. Blade asks what he wants to learn. He says he wants to learn how to kill him. He attacks Blade fiercely. The two fight fiercely, but he is exhausted and says that Blade is not a good teacher because he is still alive. Blade says that he does not want to die so soon. The girl starts to flirt with him a little, but when Sophia goes and hands him a handkerchief, he retreats. We learn that this is the fourth time clones has attacked Blade. Everyone sits in the cafeteria and discusses why he is doing this. Arn thinks his goal is to kill Blade, but Blade doesn't care. Sophia promises to protect Blade. At their base, the Kells gather before their leader, who wants them to prove they can surpass the Grey Hero, as they were created for that very purpose. Sophie checks on Blade while he's sleeping, and discovers Yona is protecting him. Yona tells her not to worry. She'll stay with Blade. Sophie leaves. He goes there, where he meets the clone. Sophie tells the clone that he must abandon the mission, because they cannot kill Blade. But the clone says that he has received orders, and that killing the Great Hero is his only purpose in life. Sophie then learns that the girls were modified after the Hero Project was shut down, and he believes that this may have affected their bodies. The clone confirms this and explains that they have aged less. Sophie tries to convince him to abandon the mission, but the clone says that he must follow his orders. He then attacks Sophie, but Sophie blocks his attack, pushes him back, and knocks him down. Sophie is about to finish him off, but he hesitates and lets the clone go. The clone says that they will wait for him. The next scene is in a virtual reality world, where Blade is with his friends. He notices how young Sophie looks, but the girl says her name is Sync. This reveals the clones' real names. Elijah explains that SYNK is an ancient word meaning the number 5. SYNK immediately attacks, dropping his blade and repeatedly hitting on the ground. They crush him. Blade dies in the virtual reality world, but then awakens in the real world. Elijah explains that Singh is happy that he was able to defeat Blade. He thought this would make Singh realize Blade was dead, but Singh realizes he's been fooled, so he sets out to find Blade. Another clone joins him, and they both set out to kill Blade. Blade leads them to a building where Arns has gathered some girls. They attack the clones. One of the boys advances, but Arns blows him away. Singh immediately counters, surprising Arns. Blade then uses magic to knock him back. Arns is amazed at how Blade is using magic. The clones get back up and combine their powers, creating a black hole that begins to destroy everything around it. Blade thinks it will only last 10 seconds, but the girls are exhausted. The black hole doesn't end. Yona explains that the black hole won't stop on its own, and some students are about to be sucked into it, but Blade saves them. Sophie jumps toward the black hole and uses her powers to stop it. They begin absorbing energy. This weakens the black hole and they destroy it, but they themselves collapse from exhaustion. Blade immediately catches it and says he did a great job. In the evening, Sophie regains consciousness and asks if anyone was hurt. Blade explains that some people were injured, but Claire healed them, so there's nothing to worry about. Blade asks Sophie about the girls, and they explain that they were also part of the Hero Project, but they underwent more modifications. Sophie reminds him that she was saved by the king and says that those girls had no one to help them, which is why their fates turned out differently. Blade says that he wants to be their friend. He even thinks that maybe they could all get into the academy, but Sophie knows that's impossible because their sole purpose in life is to defeat him. He explains that he has been neurally modified, making him unable to ignore his orders. We see Blade and his friends talking to King and learn that Sophie has left the academy. Ernest asks why the king didn't stop him, but he says that the decision isn't his. Blaze thinks Sophie might have gone to find her sisters, and Arn suggests they should bring her back. Jessica says they should start from the girl's hiding place. But the king tells him to consider why Sophie went alone. He explains that the only way to stop those cloths is to destroy them, and Sophie doesn't want to get hurt. Ernest is sure there must be another way, and the king tells him to think carefully. Blade still decides to go after her. Coup and Yona also want to help Sophie. Mao also decides to go with them. As they prepare to leave, they discover the other friends are already standing ready, and they even scold them for taking so long. Sophie is at a base, but the place is already empty. Ernest approaches her. Sophie tells him to let her go alone, but Ernest explains that they can all help together. Sophie explains the Great Hero Project to everyone. She explains that she and her sisters were created to surpass the great heroes. The project was shut down, but someone stole the research and samples, releasing the clones. Ernest wonders why the girls are after Blade again, when they should be challenging the great hero. Sophie thinks he's targeting Blade to test his powers, and Blade concocts some ag bomb stories to conceal his true identity. Sophie feels a bit like a guild because she has a good life while her sisters suffer. That's why he wants to save them and make things right, even if it means sacrificing his life. But Ernest stops him and says he can trust his friends. Sophie thinks saving them will be difficult because they have to follow his orders, and their body modifications mean they have less time left to live. Blade tells him to trust him and asks everyone for help. Meanwhile, we see the girls in another location, where they are reminded that their goal is to destroy Blade. They receive a letter containing an invitation to a challenge at the Academy Arena with Blade. Milad waits for the clones in the arena. The arena asks if he will fall for this trap, but Sophie confidently says that if the decision were his, he would. They would have. Klaus finally arrives and says he's come to destroy Blade. We're reminded by Elijah that Blade has to follow the plan, and it's revealed that he must fight alone or Klaus will flee. Klaus immediately attacks him, and Elijah explains his goal is to drain their energy so he can find their commander and reprogram the girls. Blade barely manages to handle them all, and even loses his sword. Ernest is worried, but Sophie tells him to trust Blade. Blade creates a barrier, blocking everyone and pushing them back. Ernest feels bad that he can't do anything, but Jessica reminds him that there's only one way to help Blade. Blade retrieves his sword, but one of the clones activates its hero ability. Everything spins in reverse, and Blade is thrashed around with great force. When his attack ends, Blade falls to the ground, but the girl is also completely exhausted and drained of energy. The second clone activates its power and creates multiple copies of itself. Jessica suddenly throws Blade a bottle, which he uses as a sword. He puts it in his pocket and uses its power to blow up all the clones. The girl's power also ends, and the next clone attacks Blade. But Leonard gives Blade his power, creating a barrier and blocking Blade's attack. However, Blade's sword is destroyed, and SEC attacks him. Blade dodges the attack and calls out to Arns to lend his power. Arns is surprised, wondering how Blade will use it without a sword, and he throws a bottle. Sing intervenes, causing the bottle to fall to the ground. Sophie immediately stops time with her power, picking up the bottle and saving Blade. Sing prepares to use his hero power, but Blade uses Sophie's power to dodge his attack, causing Sing to collapse exhausted. Now only the clones remain, and they attack Blade to finish him off. However, Blade still has Arns' power, and he withstand her attack. Fire and thunder spread around them, terrifying the students. When the drums settle down, the clones are still standing. The sun slowly begins to set. Blaze wonders what she's waiting for, but the clones say that her time is up and his body begins to disintegrate. Blaze is at a loss to understand what's happening. The clones explain that they only had 14 days left to live, and today is their last. Blade asks Eliza for help, but she says there's no time left. Blade considers finding the man who created these cloths, but Eliza explains that he's already been found and that he died years ago, meaning no one was giving orders to these clones. Sophie tells Blade to gather all the cloths. She then tells the clones that there's still a chance for them to live. The cloths explain that there's no point in living anymore because they couldn't complete their mission, but Blade says that if they stay alive, they can become even more powerful and one day surpass them. The girls are impressed. Sophie tells the clones to use their hero power with Blade's help. Then, all their souls are transferred into Sophie's body. The next day, we see Blade in the hospital. Sophie comes to see him. It turns out that all the clones are now living in his body, and one of them tells Blade to get well soon so she can challenge him again. Sophie regains control, and Blade asks her how she is. Sophie says it's like he has 5 children inside him, but he's happy he was able to save them. A week later, the king holds another training session. A giant monster is fighting the students. Several students are blown away. Coup transforms into his dragon form to fight, but even he can't face the monster. The king's assistant explains that a mistake was made when bringing the monster, and this is a version that is much more powerful. Arns attacks with his flames, but it's to no avail. Sophie uses all her sister's powers, combining their different skills, but it's barely effective. Mao and Yona use all their strength to blast the monster, but it doesn't affect the monster. The situation looks dire, but the king just laughs. He says there's no need to panic because they have a great hero. Just then, the monster falls with a single attack. Blade brings his lunch and asks what everyone is doing. So friends, with that, we'll wrap it up. If you liked the video, please like it. If you like watching more magical and overpowered anime like this, keep subscribing to our channel and click on the videos showing on the end screen, and I'll bring you another new video.